This week, Israel and the Jewish world commemorated two important days in the calendar, Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut. Yom HaZikaron is a day of solemn remembrance, honoring those who lost their lives in the struggle that led to the creation of the State of Israel, as well as the members of Israel's armed forces who have been killed while on active duty. Yom HaAtzmaut is Israel's Independence Day, falling the day after Yom HaZikaron, and is a day of rejoicing and celebration, a day of pride in Israel's achievements. This year, on the eve of Yom HaZikaron, I attended a unique online commemoration, not only in memory of those in Israel who had lost their lives, but in memory of Palestinians who had also been killed in the conflicts of the last 7 decades. The ceremony, entitled Sharing Sorrow, Bringing Hope, was sponsored by two grassroots organizations, Combatants for Peace and the Bereaved Families Forum. Combatants for Peace is a group of Israelis and Palestinians who have taken an active part in the cycle of violence in Israel and Palestine. Israeli soldiers serving in the IDF and Palestinians who have fought to free their country from the Israeli occupation. We are people, they say, who have raised weapons aimed at each other, seeing each other only through gun sights, but who have come together to establish combatants for peace on the basis of non-violent principles. Their mission is to work towards a two-state solution based on the 1967 borders, or as they put on their website, any other mutually agreed solution that will allow both Israelis and Palestinians to live in freedom, security, democracy, and dignity in their homeland. Their objective is to build an infrastructure which will end the conflict and occupation of the Palestinian territories, bringing together Palestinians and Israelis through non-violent means to promote peace. The Bereaved Families Forum is also a joint Palestinian and Israeli organization made up of over 650 families, all of whom have lost a close family member through the conflict, and who believe that the only way to end the struggle is not through revenge or violence, but through peace and reconciliation. Here at the LJS, we have been privileged on more than one occasion to welcome into our sanctuary, right here, members of the BFF, who have shared their stories of the loss of sons or daughters, brothers and sisters, or other close relatives. In Israel, on Yom HaZikaron, official commemoration services take place. They are part of Israeli national life, just as Remembrance Sunday is part of British public life. The joint ceremony which I attended, the 16th of its kind, where Israelis and Palestinians come together to grieve, is an alternative memorial to the official services in Israel. The idea of a shared commemoration may be upsetting or disturbing for some who regard Israel's losses as sacrifices made for the establishment and ongoing security of the state. But I think all of us are deeply aware that at the very moment the new state of Israel was created in 1948, in the aftermath of the Shoah, another tragedy was unfolding in the form of the Nakba, the catastrophe. While Jews are celebrating Yom HaAtzmaut, Palestinian Arabs are commemorating their losses and their displacement from towns and villages in Israel in 1948. If we are in any doubt about this dual narrative of two peoples, one only has to listen to the testimonies of the speakers at Tuesday evening's Yom HaZikaron. I cannot do justice to the eloquence of each of the speakers, Israeli Jews and Palestinian Arabs, Christians and Muslim, who spoke of unbearable losses in Hebrew, Arabic, and English, but who have found ways to begin to heal the ruptures caused by fear and hatred of each other. Tamar Pikes, born in Jerusalem 3 months after the Six-Day War, an artist, may have heard her father's voice while in her mother's womb, she said, but she did not get to meet him. He was killed by a Jordanian soldier in Jerusalem. After the war, her mother was left with 4 children. Her older brother, Yoni, was 13. He was a sweet, wild, and beloved boy, said Tamar, who took care of their mother and his siblings after their father's death. 6 years later, he was a combat soldier, killed on the 2nd day of the Yom Kippur War. Tamar grew up scared of Arabs. Attacks in the neighborhood where she lived fueled her nightmares. It wasn't until she married and moved to Jerusalem, close to where her loved ones were buried, and had her own children, that she began to understand that Arabs are just like her, and that the only way out of the cycle of violence and conflict is by listening and observing, by seeing in the entanglement of Arabs and Jews not fear of the other, but shared grief and experience. Leila al-Sheikh, aged 43, from a village near Bethlehem, spoke in Arabic as she shared her grief over the loss of her son, Qasay, 19 years earlier. Qasay was 6 months old. Leila awoke to the sound of his hastened breathing, following the inhalation of tear gas, which the Israeli occupation army had thrown into their yard that night. Leila's account of how they tried to rush Qasay to hospital is painful to listen to. Checkpoints blocked their entrance to Bethlehem. The city was declared a closed military area. They tried to take him to a hospital in Hebron, and that too was blocked. The baby's breathing worsened as they drove round trying to reach a hospital. A military jeep blocked them in the road for more than 4 hours. After his death, Leila was consumed with hatred. For 16 years, she refused to encounter any Israelis until the day she met people who had suffered like herself and was invited to attend a meeting of the Bereaved Families Forum. A loss is a loss, regardless of circumstances, skin color, race, or religion, she said. For the first time at a meeting of Israeli and Palestinian women in 2017, she recognized people like herself, suffering and in pain. There were others, Gili Meisler, whose brother was missing in action for several years after the end of the Yom Kippur War, who spoke of his pain as a red-hot stone burning in his stomach. The only treatment, he said, was to take revenge. He joined right-wing demonstrations, telling himself that fighting against the Arabs was the only way. Fearful of betraying his brother's memory, he founded a right-wing youth movement until he met Ali in Jerusalem. Suddenly, the enemy became a friend, and by joining the Bereaved Families Forum, he was able to speak in a different way, to share dialogue privately and more publicly in front of different audiences. Muna Abu Sara lived with her family in a refugee camp in Sheikh Jarrah. On an ordinary day, when her husband and children had driven to a market to buy food, her son Khaled was killed by a settler in a horrific act of callousness and brutality. The killing was witnessed by Khaled's sister Reem, and the life of her family was turned upside down. Muna too encountered the Bereaved Families Forum and began to take part in their narrative project. I felt I could be a part of a message of peace and reconciliation, she said. Let us live in peace, stop bloodshed, and build a new future. Each of the speakers on Tuesday evening spoke out of their experience of profound and painful losses. And yet, at the same time, they had overcome the deep-rooted fear they had of each other. They had let go of the desire for revenge, embracing what was best for their countries. Let's put an end to hate and welcome dialogue and hope, said Gili Meisler. And Professor Mubarak Awad, whose father was shot outside his home in 1948, when Mubarak was just 5, ended his testimony with these words: I am hopeful that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict will be resolved non-violently. Let us learn to accept each other as members of the human race, and may the light of faith be illuminated in everyone.